In February 1974, Strutter opens the very first Kiss album in thunderous drums, blazing heavy blues guitars, and a bass line that didn't need to be that interesting. Co-written by Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, rhythm guitarist Stanley blasts the vocals in his quintessential rock tenor. And you know, for all the heat Kiss gets for objectifying chicks, this very first song empowers women. Inspired by The Who's Tommy, Simmons wrote an overwrought epic called Stanley the Parrot in his earlier band Bullfrog Beer. Stanley would isolate the opening riff as the money. Strutter's breakdown is a tough pentatonic slab that sounds like you're putting the chains on your leather boots for a night of kicking, though it's about a female temptress. Strutter's title would perfectly describe Paul Stanley's onstage persona, the Star Child, strutting forever as one of the foremost frontmen in rock. August 1973, manager Bill Aucoin discovers Kiss at the Hotel Diplomat in Manhattan, which would have looked something like this. Their earliest filmed performance at Coventry in Queens. See, even Kiss had those gigs with that one drunk chick dancing. Aucoin and his credit card would take Kiss from zeros to superheroes, landing them a contract with Casablanca Records in under a month. Big fans of the Beatles, Stanley and Simmons would openly ape the With the Beatles cover with their own striking debut cover. The Star Child, the Catman, the BlackDiamond, and the Space Ace would release Strutter as the third single. It failed to chart. Strutter has since amassed millions of streams, appeared in video game franchises, is covered extensively, most notably by Extreme and Vitamin String Quartet, and has remained a staple of all Kiss live shows from then to the end 50 years later. Spoiler alert, it's about anal sex. Nothing to Lose is the first Kiss single ever released, February 1974. It failed to chart. The second song on the debut album, it opens with a syncopated riff in 7/4 time, placing them close to one of their influences, Led Zeppelin. Pretty brave of this new band and their fledgling record company, Neil Bogart's Casablanca, to introduce themselves to the world with 7/4. Into the verses with the familiar Chuck Berry blues chug. That's not to say the music was simple. Kiss would always have something musically interesting going on, waking their limited musical knowledge to its outer edges. Written by bassist Gene Simmons, he and guitarist Paul Stanley would share or double the lead vocals during the verses. And for the choruses, drummer Peter Criss would call and answer in that gravel driveway voice that sounds like he's played 1,000 pubs. And let's face it, he had. At 28, Criss was by far the oldest and most experienced band member at that point. So in early shows, he was the voice of Kiss, with a basic lowbrow pub demeanor. Stanley would eventually grab the frontman reins from Criss to elevate the banter to arena speak. A biting solo from lead guitarist Ace Frehley, cowbell, and honky-tonk piano in the choruses by Bruce Foster, which would angle them closer to the Stones. Kiss performed Nothing to Lose live on their first national TV appearance, March 1974, on Dick Clark's In Concert.
Hey world, we're Kiss. We want everybody here to come along with us, because you've got nothing to lose.
And he was right. It was called hard rock back then, but Firehouse was truly grunge. A rumbling, thunderous, plodding riff and walking bass line and gapped drum pattern accompanies Stanley's vocal about the perils of falling too hard for someone lest they take advantage of your simping. Simmons and Stanley would also emulate a fire engine siren with falsetto. And I love this line. Headed for commotion. That's so funny. A plucked lead guitar solo is just gravy. Written by Stanley, inspired by the Moves' Fire Brigade. Firehouse gives the demon license to spit fire on stage while sirens scream and red fire engine lights spin. Kiss was not the first to play with fire. The Crazy World of Arthur Brown and Pink Floyd were using pyro in the late 60s and early 70s, but Gene Simmons was the first to use the magician's trick of actually blowing fire, scaring all the parents and religious groups, making Kiss written by lead guitarist Ace Frehley about what he knows best, alcoholism. It was a song about loneliness and poverty. I'm not even sure why I wrote a song about gin. I was a beer man. ColdGin was inspired by Freeze, Fire and Water, which Frehley would cover as a solo artist in 2016, with none other than Paul Stanley singing lead. Now, when Stanley and Simmons formulated Kiss, they foresaw a Beatles model of every band member writing and singing their own songs. But Ace, not confident as a vocalist yet, hands his song to Gene to gargle in acid. If Stanley had the quintessential rock star voice, then Simmons had the junkyard dog growl that he honed into a unique character voice. Stanley's opening squeal is less a rock yelp and more the sound of him being pinched on the body. An insistent, dirty riff based around a pedaled bass, the verses utilizing gaps and power chords, the choruses flowering out with drum patterns, into a jaunty, swaggering bridge with trills aplenty, all guitars in unison. ColdGin on stage would serve as intro to Frehley's guitar solo spot with this flesh-tearing riff. During the 1996 reunion tour, Ace would take a verse. Leave and get another quart. He'd been singing it for years solo by that point. In the early years, Stanley would ham up his spoken intro to this song as if the whole band were renegade alcoholics, while in reality, Gene was a teetotaler, Paul hardly touched booze, and Peter loved his drugs. And even Ace, anytime you ask him, he'll tell you.
September 15th, I celebrated 14 years sober.
Yeah, Ace has been sober for the last 14 years. For the last 14 years.
It's ColdGin time again. I know you'll always win.
Share.
Do it.
Smash.
Patreon.
You complete me.
Back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, Stanley Eisen met Gene Klein, and to prove he could also write songs, the first song he played for Gene was Sunday Driver. It impressed the arrogant Klein enough to team up with Eisen in Wicked Lester. Eisen would become Paul Stanley. Klein would become Gene Simmons. The drivers of Wicked Lester would become Kiss. And the happy, breezy, innocent love song would become Let Me Know, the best slice of pure rock and roll on the debut Kiss album. With its blues guitars and walking bass line, this is Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, early Elvis, 1-4-5 to glory. Simmons would take the first two verses, and then Stanley would take the B section, into Frehley doing Chuck Berry meets Mick Ronson. Who would have thought this irresponsible Bronx kid from the planet Jendel would himself become the influence for generations of axe wielders? Well, not him. If I knew I was going to influence thousands of guitar players, I would have practiced more. A final surprise, a beautiful a cappella stinger. Did I just describe Kiss as beautiful? An outro lashing by Frehley would be transplanted live to the end of the song She to introduce his solo spot. Where he even utilized primitive finger tap before Eddie cornered that market. Now that's beautiful. The second and goofiest single from the Kiss debut album, KissinTime, was not on the original February 1974 pressing, but recorded in April 74 and included on album reissues from July 74 onwards. To promote the album, Casablanca owner Neil Bogart hit on the idea of a national kissing contest, insisting that Kiss cover this 1959 Bobby Rydell Top 20 song as a tie-in promo. Kiss said, okay, on the condition it never appear on any albums. Neil assured us it would be used for background music in a radio spot for the contest. But Bogart had every intention of shamelessly releasing KissinTime as a single to jog the flagging sales of the album. Well, it drove the album up to 87 on the charts while stalling itself at 83. Written by Cal Mann and Bernie Lowe, Kiss's version with rewritten lyrics ended up a well-performed but badly produced rocker that Gene Simmons claims was recorded in under an hour. It was backed with Kiss's first single, Nothing to Lose. Simmons shouts the first verse lead vocal. Stanley rocks the second. And Criss gargles the third in his seasoned Rod Stewart rasp. And his creative, syncopated, groove-infused drumming drives the simple lowbrow riff and lyrics. Stanley recalls how disconnected the whole endeavor was when, in full costume, he walked up to a couple during one of the kissing contests. And the guy, while keeping his lips in contact with the girls, looked out the side of his eyes and said, "Who the hell are you?" They had no idea it had anything to do with us. Still, due to Bogart's machinations, manager Bill Aucoin was able to gain Kiss national exposure on the Mike Douglas Show with the winners of the kissing contest and a performance of Firehouse, with Gene volunteering for an on-air interview woefully unprepared.
Actually, what I am is evil incarnate.
These days, Paul and Gene, masterful interview subjects. But for Gene back then, it definitely wasn't. Deuce, a cranky, filthy riff that songwriter Gene Simmons brings from Wicked Lester, an attempt to recreate the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction, with a deceptive, sneaky rhythm pattern involving semiquavers thrown in at odd points. Like all the songs on the first album, it is so well known by the band by the time of its tracking that the album took just 6 days to record, 7 days to mix. Produced by two names legendary in Kiss canon, Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise. Kiss was such an easy band to record. The songs fell together so quickly, the desire to hit the grand slam right out of the box. I never sensed that Kiss was about making musical magic. They wanted to make rock and roll history. Though it's been a concert opener for many tours, for the first couple of decades, even Gene didn't know what Deuce was about, or wouldn't tell us. What does that mean? Telling your grandma to get out? Is it obvious, though? I've always taken it to mean your man is worth two men. Gene has since clarified it's about the man providing for two people, and adding, if the man is the breadwinner, he's the boss. Gene tempers his misogyny. If the woman brings home the money, then she's the boss. But the idea that both are bosses if only one of them brings home the money? No, that's not how it works. And if you don't get it, get out! Subscribe.
Please.
Argue.
You talking to me?
Donate.
For the love of God!
Love Theme from Kiss is that type of sleazy mid-tempo instrumental for that one drunk chick dancing. Under this simple, almost comical riff, listen to that bass walking around, poking its nose into everybody's business. It's amazing that rock elitists still claim Gene can't play. Love Theme is part of a larger piece called Acrobat, which featured a trucking second half, informally called You're Much Too Young. Listen to the raw bootlegs of early Kiss performing the 7-minute Acrobat at the Daisy, and you'll hear elements of Detroit Rock City and 100,000 Years. According to Gene Simmons, the full instrumental was recorded for the album, but producers Kerner and Wise advised to edit and rename it. The only Kiss song ever credited to all 4 original members. The Love Theme riff itself is harmonized by Ace and Paul. It would have been so cool to see these two Axemen utilize their harmony guitars more throughout Kiss's career. But except for a few key passages over the years, yeah, you know, most notably Detroit Rock City, Kiss would never come close to the double axe attack that Lizzie, Priest, and Maiden would become monstrous for. But we can't blame them. Paul chose the route of singer, songwriter, frontman, and co-manager of the Kiss empire. And Ace was just lazy. The only 2 songs from the debut album that would rarely make it to the stage are KissinTime and Love Theme. At least 3 or more of all the other songs on this album would be in constant rotation in the Kiss live repertoire from here to eternity. And that's plenty sleaze enough. Kiss meets Einstein. Before Kiss forged God of Thunder, 100,000 Years was the song Gene Simmons spat blood to introduce. His first blood was in March 1974. What a spectacle this must have been. A horrifying journey into the frayed mind of a spasming bat demon vomiting the entrails of its bloodied prey. As always, the Kiss circus of fire and smoke bombs and blood and risers would disguise just how good this rock band was. Simmons starts the song with a pump-action riff. And long before the new wave of British heavy metal, here was a bass gallop. To be exact, a shuffle gallop, not the syncopated quadruplets that would make Steve Harris wet our Iron Maidens. Nonetheless, a big-assed steed to ride.
Climb upon my big-assed steed and ride.
Just when you think the bass is driving the song, Peter Criss's jazz-influenced drumming chops propel this swinger even further, with ghost notes that a straight-ahead rock drummer would not have thunk to flay. And then the vocals scar the vinyl. Songwriter Paul Stanley singing of returning from somewhere after so long that it must have been a bitch while I was gone. It seems like he's alluding to an unfortunate and patient woman, however, about the amount of time one spends going from one galaxy to another and returning 100,000 years later. Co-written by Gene Simmons, whose interest in science fiction only fueled the time travel narrative. What if you're an astronaut and you leave? How long can you stay in love? And then Ace Frehley's exacting, arpeggiated triplet guitar solo slams 100,000 years through that wormhole and back again. I've always been impressed by that one, where Ace made the most of his limited vocabulary. It's a syncopated part that's tough to play on stage. Every band member contributing ferocity to create an unstoppable
big-assed steed.
The first single from the album Kiss was a song about anal sex, and the album closes with a song about a prostitute. No way! Songwriter Paul Stanley openly states he styled BlackDiamond after the Stones' Brown Sugar. More powerful, more epic, and just as dirty, about a lady
Out on
the street for a living.
Stanley croons softly over a clean electric guitar. And then Black Diamond launches into operatic fury, with Peter Criss taking the lead vocal. When Stanley and Simmons were auditioning drummers, as soon as they heard Peter sing in his band, he was in. Contrary to Kiss canon, Peter's ad didn't read "drummer willing to do anything to make it." It read this. Black Diamond Live would be Kiss's dramatic finale over many tours that featured a drum riser actually rising, hydraulic platforms for each guitarist that rose or swept over the crowd, pyrotechnics, confetti glutting the air, and the ritual smashing of Paul's guitar. On record, a slowing down tape effect fades the song into oblivion. In later years, drummers Eric Carr and Eric Singer would perform the song without any lapse in raspiness. Who would have thought that Kiss could ever hire two drummers whose voices emulated Criss's growl so perfectly? The album Kiss was nothing new musically. It followed the trail blazed by Sabbath and Zeppelin, and the band's image was a product of its times, gleaned from the New York Dolls and Alice Cooper. Yet Kiss's power rock and theatrical acumen, the energetic stage shows forbidding the press to take photos of them without makeup, the commitment to their characters, made them a seminal influence on the American rock industry and a megaforce in multimedia marketing. From the beginning, Kiss opened their shows with the proclamation, "You wanted the best, you got the best. The hottest band in the land, Kiss," which would be expanded to hottest band in the world as they became just that, all on the back of this diamond in the black, this Kiss. Share.
Do it.
Smash.
Patreon.
You